And we left off last week in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 5, and Paul was boasting about all that he had done because, in essence, he was tired, I think, of these super apostles bragging about all they're doing, and when all they're doing is really ripping people off, taking their money and putting on a show, and they weren't speaking the truth. And Paul revealed what his life was like and how his life has been basically a commitment, a total commitment to Christ and a total sacrifice to Christ. And he says, even if I should choose to boast, I would not be a fool because I would be speaking the truth. Again, the point Paul's making here, and what we had to study on Sunday, as he told it all that he'd been through, all the beatings, the shipwrecks he's been through, he's in essence saying, I can boast about this because it's the truth. I'm telling you the truth. This is what my life would be like. What's interesting, do you think people who boast about themselves tend to tell the truth? No. Exaggerate. And I found this slide. Joe will get a kick out of this. It's the top 5 lies told by boasting fishermen. The first lie is how big the fish actually was, how many fish they caught, how big the fish was that broke the line or got off the hook. Another one's telling their bosses they were sick when they were actually really fishing. And then the final one is the number of hours they were fishing. Oh, we were only fishing a few hours, and they was fishing all day long. So those are the top 5, whenever they look down, the top 5 lies told by fishermen. This is bragging, and in essence, that's why Paul was talking about. He says, those guys that are out there boasting about all they're doing, I'm telling you the truth. This is what my life was. They are bragging or boasting, and typically when they brag or boast, they're adding to the story. They're making the story larger than it truly is. And why do you think why does Paul not like to boast?
He doesn't want to call attention to himself.
Absolutely correct. He doesn't want to call attention to himself. And also he says, so no one will think of me more than is warranted by what I do or by what I say. So again, you hit the nail on the head. He didn't want to talk about himself, and he doesn't want others to think more highly of him than what is true. So that can cause a problem too, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But number one, do you think it's common in our society today for people to be concerned that someone might think they're greater than they really are? No, people usually like people to think about that. But there's an issue to that, because in the end, is it better to be truthful about your abilities or to falsely elevate them? Tell the truth, because I may tell you, there's been so many people, even people that I've known personally throughout my life, that have embellished what they know and what they do, and then when the time comes for them to demonstrate all they've been bragging about, they can't do it, and it's embarrassing. And it's better off just to be truthful, what you know, what your talents are, what you've done. And that's what Paul was talking about. Paul's telling the truth, and he can back up what he's done with action, because he can show that is exactly the life he lived. He wasn't embellishing it. He wasn't bragging about it. He was just telling them fact. And he says, or because of these suppressingly great revelations, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited. So here's Paul talking, and I don't think Paul ever was a conceited person, but he's saying, so that I don't get all puffed up or conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. That's caused a lot of discussion of people, because it doesn't tell us what it is. What do you think it is? What was Paul's thorn in the flesh? He says, God has given me a thorn in the flesh to keep me grounded so I don't get the big hit. In other words, what he's saying.
Probably had an injury or something.
I think he had cataracts so that he can see well. He talks about his eyes and his vision.
Right.
I don't think he ever forgot of what he done.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that he ever forgot that. I think Satan always wants us to remember our faults, remember our past, when God says, I have forgiven you of your past. Don't think of it anymore. That's easier said than done. Because you really feel bad about it, you're guilty about it. You know you're guilty about it. You know you were guilty when you asked for forgiveness, but I just look at that Satan always had that little bit of a dig with him of what Paul done. He killed Christians.
He was a very ungodly man, although he thought he was, but he was not. And I think that's right. And there's different opinions on this, and it could be all of them. But Janie, the one you said is a very common thought, is the flesh, that what he's dealing with is basically his conscience. He realizes he cannot forget what he had done in his past. And others have thought it was his eyesight, because several times in his letter he says, "See how big I write my name." They think he had very poor eyesight, whether it was cataracts or maybe just like older age. They didn't have reading glasses back then. But whatever it is, Paul feels like what God has put something in my life to keep me grounded, so I don't think higher of myself than I should. And that could be even his looks, because some said he wasn't a very handsome person. He had bad eyesight. Obviously, he's got a past that could haunt him. But what was the entire purpose of God allowing this to happen? And that's what he's saying. God allowed this to happen. He did something. And why did he do it? I kind of already mentioned about it. Yeah, to keep him from being conceited, to keep him from being like those super apostles, because Paul had every right to brag. Paul had every right to talk about all that he was doing. But if you notice, the difference between Paul and these super apostles, Paul was telling what God was doing through him. The super apostles were talking about what they were doing. And again, we really don't know what Paul's thorn in the flesh was. And there's probably good reason we don't know. It allows us to put our own ideas on what's going on there. But God likely wanted Paul's difficulty to be described in general terms so that we could apply to any difficulties we may face, and so that it's kind of open-ended for us to think about. And whether our thorn we struggle with is physical, emotional, or spiritual, we can know that God has a purpose and that his strength will shine through our weaknesses. But we do know it was something that Paul, obviously it bothered him, because he says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. And what does the fact that Paul pleaded with God 3 times to remove the thorn from him tell us about it? It bothered him a lot. And it's pleaded as beg. Tearful. I mean, he was crying, begging God, take this away from me. So it even could be pain. He could have had a bad back. I don't know. No one really knows. But obviously it was bothering him. And but he said to me, and this is God's response to him saying, take this away from me. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. You know, I never thought about it till now. I just mentioned a bad back. Think of all the times he's been beaten and the things he's been through. He could have had arthritis or anything else going on in his body, but whatever it was, God has told him, I've done this for a reason, and that is so that my strength may be revealed in your weakness, which is interesting. It says, now what do people tend to do with their weaknesses? They tend to, look what Paul says. He says, I boast about my weaknesses. Do people tend to brag about, here's my weakness? No, they tend to hide it.
They don't mention it.
Yeah, they hide it. They don't mention it. That's where they embellish. They cover up the weakness part. And why does Paul then want to boast about his weaknesses?
To brag on God.
Absolutely right. It draws the attention away from him, which clearly shows his heart compared to these other super apostles and these others that were more popular during this time. Paul says in Philippians 3:10, I want to know Christ. Yes, to know the power of his resurrection. He wants to participate in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death. Well, think about what he's writing there. Could any of us really say that? I'll be honest, I can't. Could you say you would want to participate in being crucified and becoming like him in his death? I mean, again, it shows you just the level of commitment Paul has. And he says then, so this is what Paul says, I've got these weaknesses, I've got these pains or whatever it may be, I've got this thorn in my flesh, but God put it there to keep me from being conceited, and I accept that because I want to be like Jesus. I know Jesus suffered, is what he's saying, therefore I want to suffer in the same way. Then he says, that is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. Well, again, I'll be honest with you, I can't say I delight in weaknesses and insults and hardships and persecutions and difficulties, but this is the kind of where the bar is set for us as Christians. And why do you think Paul would delight in these sufferings?
Because he feels closer to Christ during those times.
Absolutely correct. And that's what he closes out with. He says, I delight in this thorn in my side and this weaknesses and in hardships, because I know that when I am weak, then I am strong. And who do we tend to rely on when we are strong?
Christ.
Absolutely. And who do we tend to rely on when we're weak?
We try to fix it ourselves.
Exactly, ourselves. And when we're weak, we tend to try to do it. And this is spiritually weak. When we're spiritually weak, we tend to do it ourselves. But when we're truly weak and we rely on God, then we're strong, because it's in His strength is where we really we grow. And when you think about it, why did Paul have to boast about himself? Because this is the end of all his boasting. First of all, he had to brag on himself. And I really think he kind of felt bad about bragging about himself. So he had to tell how, he really can't be conceited because God's putting a thorn in his flesh. And he's saying, I'm a very weak person, but God uses my weakness for His strength. Again, why? And I think we talked about that a little.
Because he was trying to show them how God had used him.
Absolutely right. And remember, in this church, they had some false teachers there that they really looked up to. So he says this. He said, I have made a fool of myself. That's because Paul feels like he's making a fool to brag, but he had to. He says, but you drove me to it. I ought to have been commended by you. So what's he saying there?
That they were not treating him like
The super
the
apostles.
person he was.
Yeah, and he's saying that I had to brag. I had to make a fool of myself because it's your fault. You drove me to it because all that you were concerned about was all the bragging that you were hearing. And he's saying, look at my life. I should have been commended by you. Instead, you looked up to those super apostles. And then he brings it up to that very point. He says, I ought to have been commended by you, for I am not in the least inferior to the super apostles, even though I am nothing. I like the way he puts it there, because what's he telling those super apostles? What's he calling those super apostles? Right.
They're nothing.
Absolutely. Paul is saying, listen, those super apostles, they've got nothing on me. I'm not inferior to them super apostles, even though I'm nothing. So he's saying, Paul's saying I'm nothing. He's saying the super apostles are even more of a nothing than him. But again, it's those super apostles were really putting on the show and drawing the people. Like I said, they had the flashy, I think of some TV evangelists. They had the hair and the $1 million smile. Their teeth flashed, and here comes poor Paul, been beat half to death and bruised and banged up and scarred up, and he wasn't much to look at. And he's telling them, again, God sent him, Paul. It's not about how you look. It's not about how you talk. It's not about what kind of smile you got, how good your hair looks. It's all about your heart. And the bottom line, Paul's saying, is we're all worth nothing. So no one has a right to get the big head that they're a super apostle or better than someone else. He says, I persevered in demonstrating among you the marks of a true apostle, including signs, wonders, and miracles. So again, Paul is he's basically reassuring him, look at what I've done. I've told you my life. Not only have I showed you my life, you've seen here in action with the signs, wonders, and miracles that I've done. And he says, how are you inferior to the other churches, except I was never a burden to you? Forgive me this wrong. He says, now I'm ready to visit you for the third time. And again, I will not be a burden to you. Why is Paul so concerned about being a financial burden to the Christians? That's what he's talking about. I'm not a burden to you. I wasn't a burden to you before. I come again, I'm not going to be a burden. I'm not going to ask you to pay me anything.
them to hold that over him.
Right. And what you think about, again, he's comparing himself. He's trying to get them to understand these super apostles out here, the send me the, what is it they use, Janie, what's they say? Send me a seed, give me some money. Love offerings. These that were more concerned about money than the Word of God. Paul wants to make it crystal clear that Paul is there because God has called him there, and he wants to definitely make a clear delineation between him and his preaching and the false teaching and the money and that these others are after.
Well, he's trying to open their eyes, but still they didn't see it.
Right. But he does want something, and I love the way he puts it here. He says, now I'm ready to visit you again for the third time, and I will not be a burden to you, because what I want is not your possessions, but you. After all, children should not have to save up for their parents, but parents for their children. How does Paul feel like he is towards that church, his relationship with that church?
They're his children.
Yeah, he's the one that he started that church. Yeah. He began that church. He planted that church. He probably, many of those in that church were saved because of his teaching. So that's what he wants. He wants them, not their possessions. He wants their heart, and he wants their minds, and he wants that all dedicated to Jesus, to follow him like he's following Jesus. And he's saying, just like a father to their children, I'm not coming to you expecting you to financially support me. I'm coming to help you grow and mature and raise you. So he continues, he says, so I will very gladly spend for you everything I have and expend myself as well. If I love you more, will you love me less? That's an interesting question. What do you think he means by that? He says, if I love you more, will you love me less? What kind of love is he talking about there? Think about it as a parent. What are some mistakes that parents make? They tend to want to be their friends. Yeah. The children. Paul is, I think what he's saying here. Yeah, Paul's saying here is when I come and I preach the truth, it's because I love you more. But because I love you so much, I'm willing to give everything of myself and to preach the truth. Will that cause you to love me less? And that was obviously a concern of his. And I don't remember what it was. I didn't even know the church. I saw it. I showed it to Janie yesterday. There was a preacher they'd recorded at church, and he was on fire. He was upset because some in that church had been sleeping together, and he was just going off. I mean, he was preaching, and what I call preaching. And I said, well, they probably a bunch of them left the church after he got done saying that. But that's what I thought of was Paul, and that's the point Paul's making. I'm coming here because I love you, and this is why. This is what he's.
Like what Charlie Kurtz said. If you don't come out of church feeling guilty, he wasn't preaching the right thing.
That's right. And that's why he said this is what he's ultimately concerned about. And I think this is what Charlie was ultimately concerned about. He said, I will most gladly spend and be expended for your souls. If I love you more, am I to be loved less? Again, he's asking that. It doesn't matter. He's spending and he's expending himself for their souls. And that's what he's concerned about. Those super apostles, do you think they were concerned about their souls? No. What were the super apostles concerned about? Money and tickling their ears and getting as many people in as they come in. I'm sure they had all the neat programs, and of course they didn't have fog machines back then. They had all the neat, all of the fancy things and the laser light shows and everything going on.
They had all the instruments.
Yeah, and but Paul says he was concerned about their souls, and those false apostles were not. He said, be that as it may, I have not been a burden to you. Yet, crafty fellow that I am, I caught you by trickery. That's kind of interesting you say that. He says, then he goes, did I exploit you through any of the men I sent to you? And the question is, did Paul use trickery or exploit the Christians? He's being sarcastic here. Again, if you read Paul, that's one thing about Paul, he's sarcastic. Now, if you turn to 1 Corinthians, his first letter of the church in Corinth, he talks about how he didn't come to pull anything over their eyes or to trick them. He's being a little sarcastic, I think. He's trying to, in essence, say, I didn't come like them super apostles and kind of trick you into things, and I came to teach you the truth. And this is what Paul taught. He says, and so it was with me, brothers and sisters. When I came to you, I did not come with eloquence or human wisdom, as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you, except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I came to you in weakness, with great fear and trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power. So Paul came speaking the truth, preaching Christ and him crucified, without all the flash, without all the show, without all the glamour that was being put on by some of these other false teachers. And Paul's main concern was, I'm concerned that I love you so much, I'm so concerned about your souls, that you're not going to like me, because I have to point out the sin in your life. The super apostles, they don't point out the sin. They just make you feel good. And Paul says, my concern is I love you so deeply that I'm willing to show you where you are wrong. And because of that, you may not like me. And when you think about that, that's what we're called to do. And we just happened to mention Charlie. I think it's something he was very good. God had gifted him the ability to help communicate with people and help them understand what they were doing was wrong. And he did it in a manner where they didn't feel like he was attacking them. He was just sharing, I'm truly concerned about you. I want you to see, whether you believe me, and he would even say, whether you believe me or not, whether you want to walk away and forget, I've got to share with you this truth. So I'm hoping that you'll think about it at least. And I think that's the way Paul was. He spoke the truth. And as a result, just like Jesus himself, Paul was eventually had his head cut off for speaking the truth. So Jesus was crucified, and Paul was decapitated for the truth. So with that said, any other thoughts before I close? Okay, Joe, do you want to close us in prayer?